I served this country for 20 years, and with one signature, they took away the only health care I could count on, a tearful veteran declared in a video from his small Texas town. A plea that reached Jasmine Crockett and prompted her to confront the administration that broke that promise. The video was not professionally produced. It was filmed on a shaky cell phone, held by a man named Silas Croft, whose face was etched with the kind of deep, weary lines that time alone doesn't create. Within an hour of being posted to his local VFW's private Facebook group, it was shared. Then, shared again. By midnight, it had escaped the confines of veterans' forums and was exploding across every major social media platform. News anchors, who had been discussing the president's latest tariffs, suddenly pivoted. On screen, the slick graphics of cable news were replaced by the raw, pixelated footage of Silas Croft sitting in a dimly lit garage, his voice cracking as he held up a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The plea was so raw, so devoid of political spin, that it sliced through the noise of Washington, D.C. and landed like a gut punch in millions of American homes. It wasn't a political attack. It was a cry of betrayal, and it was about to find its champion. 3 days before Silas Croft's life became a matter of national debate, President Trump's newly appointed Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Preston Vance, was clinking a champagne flute at a gala inside the National Building Museum. Vance was the picture of confidence, a man who had moved seamlessly from a corporate boardroom to a cabinet position. He was surrounded by a circle of lobbyists and defense contractors, laughing as he explained the administration's new, synergistic approach to governmental efficiency. He spoke of optimizing assets and sunsetting legacy programs that were, in his words, a drain on the taxpayer. We've already identified and trimmed over $2 billion in redundant spending at the VA, Vance boasted, taking a sip of his champagne. It's bold. It's necessary. Some of the old guard will complain, but you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. It's about fiscal responsibility. The president is thrilled. He moved through the crowd with an unearned swagger, accepting congratulations for budget cuts that had not yet fully revealed their human cost. He was a man celebrating a victory on a battlefield he had never visited. At that same moment, 200 miles away in her modest D.C. apartment, Representative Jasmine Crockett was on a late-night Zoom call, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop. The call wasn't with lobbyists or donors. It was with her district staff back in Dallas. Her legislative director, a sharp, tireless young man named Marcus Thorne, had his screen shared, highlighting the text of a new executive order signed by President Trump. It was dense with bureaucratic language, but one section caught his eye. Item 4B, Consolidation of Specialized Care Mandates, Marcus read aloud. That's it. That's the legal justification they're using. They're terminating the Rural Veterans Care Access Program, effective immediately. Jasmine leaned closer to her screen, her expression hardening. As the daughter of an Air Force veteran, the VA wasn't an abstract government agency to her. It was the institution that had cared for her own father. It was a promise. What does termination mean in real terms, Marcus? Who gets hit? She asked, her voice low. It means any veteran living more than 60 miles from a full-service VA hospital loses their subsidy for travel and their access to telehealth consultations for specialized care, he replied. We're talking about folks in the outer counties, people who can't just take a half day off work to drive to Dallas. For some of them, this program was their only link to a cardiologist or a PTSD specialist. Jasmine was silent for a long moment, the weight of the words sinking in. This wasn't about fiscal responsibility. This was about abandoning people. Find them, she said finally, her voice firm. I want you to dig into every veterans forum, every Facebook group, every corner of the district. I want to know who this is hurting. I want their names. She felt a familiar, cold anger begin to rise within her, the same feeling she used to get as a public defender when she saw the system getting ready to crush someone who had no one in their corner. For the next 2 days, her office compiled the data. The initial response was a low grumble of confusion and anger on small, localized online forums. Veterans were posting copies of letters they'd received, asking if anyone knew what it meant. They were trying to call the VA helpline, only to be met with endless hold music or a confused operator who knew less than they did. The policy was so new, so sudden, that the bureaucracy hadn't even caught up to its own cruelty. Marcus sent Jasmine a daily digest of the comments, each one a small story of anxiety and betrayal. A 75-year-old Vietnam vet from outside Corsicana, who wouldn't be able to see his oncologist. A young mother, an Iraq war veteran, who relied on the telehealth service for her PTSD counseling because she couldn't leave her kids. Then, on the third day, Marcus sent a single, urgent email with the subject line, "You need to see this, now." Attached was a link. Jasmine clicked it. The video loaded, and Silas Croft's face filled her screen. She saw the worn-out Desert Storm veteran cap he clutched in his hands. She heard the tremor in his voice as he spoke about his service, about the promise he believed in, about the letter that had just yanked his lifeline for managing the chronic pain from a service-related injury. She watched him fight back tears as he said the line that was already beginning to echo across the country. "I served this country for 20 years. And with one signature, they took away the only health care I could count on." Jasmine watched the entire 2-minute clip without moving. When it finished, she closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and picked up her phone. She didn't call the press. She called Marcus. "There's an emergency hearing on the VA budget implementation tomorrow morning," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except for a steely resolve. "Get me a seat. I don't care who you have to call or what you have to do. Get me in that room." The next morning, the Rayburn House office building was buzzing. The House Committee on Veterans Affairs had indeed convened an emergency hearing, though for the Republican majority it was intended as a platform for Secretary Vance to tout the administration's new budget as a triumph of fiscal conservatism. Preston Vance arrived, flanked by a retinue of 6 aides, carrying thick binders filled with charts and talking points. He strode to the witness table, shook hands with the committee chairman, and settled into his seat with the easy confidence of a man who knew the fix was in. He expected a few pointed questions from the Democrats, but mostly he expected a coronation. The hearing began as predicted. The chairman, a stoic Republican from a deep red state, opened with a question that was less of a question and more of an invitation for a monologue. "Mr. Secretary," he began, "could you please elaborate on how the bold new efficiencies outlined in the President's executive order will strengthen the VA for the next generation of American heroes?" Vance smiled, leaned into the microphone, and launched into his well-rehearsed speech. He talked about 21st-century solutions, data-driven resource allocation, and ending the era of wasteful spending. For nearly an hour, the hearing followed this script. Republican members praised Vance's decisiveness. Democratic members raised concerns about the broad nature of the cuts, but their attacks were diffused, focused on budget line items and bureaucratic procedure. It was technical, abstract, and utterly disconnected from the reality of Silas Croft's garage. Jasmine Crockett sat at the far end of the dais, waiting. She had her 5 minutes, just like everyone else. In front of her, on the polished wood, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a list of questions or a page of talking points. It was a high-resolution screenshot of Silas Croft's face, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. That was her only note. She watched Vance parry questions with practiced ease, deflecting any criticism with a wave of corporate jargon. He was insulated by his title, his suit, and his statistics. He was untouchable. Finally, the chairman turned to her. "The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Miss Crockett, for 5 minutes." Jasmine leaned forward, but she didn't look at the secretary. She looked at her fellow committee members. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice calm and measured. "My father served in the United States Air Force. One of the things he taught me is that a promise is not a suggestion. It's a bond. It's your word. And when the government of the United States makes a promise to the men and women who defend it, that bond is supposed to be sacred." She paused, letting the words hang in the air before finally turning her gaze to the witness table. "Mr. Secretary, yes or no? Do you believe the United States government should keep its promises to its veterans?" Vance, caught slightly off guard by the directness of the question, offered a smooth, practiced smile. "Of course, Congresswoman. This administration is more committed than any before it to honoring our nation's heroes. That's precisely what these reforms are designed to do, to ensure the VA is sustainable and strong for decades to come. It was a perfect non-answer. Jasmine nodded slowly, as if accepting his point. Good. I'm glad we agree on that fundamental principle. Let's talk about a specific promise, the Rural Veterans Care Access Program. Are you familiar with it? Vance shifted slightly in his seat. I'm familiar with the line item, yes, he said, a hint of condescension in his tone. It was a low-enrollment, high-cost program with significant administrative overhead, an unfortunate but clear example of the kind of inefficiency we are tasked with eliminating. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Inefficiency, she repeated softly. Mr. Secretary, for a veteran living in Eastland County, Texas, that inefficiency was a promise that they could see a heart specialist without having to spend 8 hours on the road and lose a day's pay they couldn't afford. For a single mother in Palo Pinto County who fought in Iraq, that inefficiency was the promise that she could get counseling for her trauma without having to find a babysitter for her 2 young kids. It may have been a low enrollment program, Mr. Secretary, but for those who were enrolled, it was a lifeline. It was a promise. And you broke it. The room had grown quiet. The gentle murmur of aides and spectators had ceased. This was no longer about budgets and line items. It had become personal. Vance's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, defensive expression. He was losing control of the narrative. Congresswoman, he began, his voice taking on a sharper edge, with all due respect, we are governing for 330 million people. We cannot allow policy to be dictated by a few isolated, anecdotal cases. While any individual story is regrettable, we have to look at the bigger picture. We can't let a few anecdotal cases derail necessary fiscal streamlining. That was it. That was the word. The mistake. The dismissal of a human being as a statistic. There. Jasmine Crockett looked down at the picture of Silas Croft on her desk. She looked back up at the secretary, who sat there, smug and secure in his fortress of jargon. A flicker of something that looked like pity crossed her face before it was replaced by cold, focused intensity. An anecdotal case? She said, her voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to introduce you to an anecdotal case. His name is Silas Croft. Jasmine Crockett gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to her legislative director, Marcus, who was sitting in the first row of the public gallery. He tapped a key on his laptop. In an instant, the 2 large television screens mounted on the wall behind the committee dais, which had been displaying the official seal of the U.S. House of Representatives, flickered and went black. A heartbeat later, they came to life. Silas Croft's face, raw and unfiltered, filled the screens, his image towering over the witness table. Preston Vance flinched, as if he'd been struck. The shaky camera phone footage was a jarring intrusion into the sterile, mahogany-paneled formality of the hearing room. The audio, tinny and full of echo from the garage, began to play. "My name is Silas Croft," the voice from the speakers said, filling the suddenly silent chamber. "I was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. I served for 20 years. I was in Desert Storm." The camera in the video panned down for a second to a dusty box filled with medals and commendations before returning to his face. "I'm not one to complain. You serve. You accept the risks. You come home. You deal with the consequences. My back isn't what it used to be. The VA, they promised they would help me manage it. Pain. This program, this telehealth thing, it meant I could talk to a specialist without driving 3 hours to the city. It meant I could get my prescriptions adjusted without having to take 2 days off from the garage." In the hearing room, no one moved. The Republican chairman stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. The Democratic ranking member leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his face a mask of rapt attention. The aides behind Secretary Vance were frozen, their binders of talking points suddenly useless. They were witnessing the complete and total demolition of their carefully constructed narrative. On the screen, Silas Croft held up the letter he'd received. His hand was trembling, not from age, but from anger and a deep, profound sense of hurt. "And then I got this," His voice cracked, the sound echoing unnaturally in the acoustically engineered room. "It says my program is being terminated due to fiscal streamlining." Fiscal streamlining? I haven't been able to get a full night's sleep in 15 years because of what happened to my spine in a Humvee outside Kuwait City, and they call my care a line item to be streamlined? He looked directly into the camera lens, but in that moment, it felt like he was looking directly at Preston Vance. "I did my part. I signed a contract. I wrote a blank check on my life and my health, payable to my country. I just thought they'd honor it." He took a shaky breath, the fight seeming to drain out of him, replaced by a wave of pure sorrow. "I served this country for 20 years, and with one signature, they took away the only health care I could count on. What am I supposed to do now?" The video ended. The screens went black, plunging the room back into its normal lighting, but a profoundly abnormal silence. The quiet stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the unspoken reality of what everyone had just witnessed. Preston Vance sat rigid in his chair, his face pale. His corporate composure had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked small and utterly exposed. Jasmine Crockett let the silence do its work before she spoke, her voice cutting through it like a scalpel. She did not raise it. She did not have to. "He is not a consequence, Mr. Secretary," she said, her eyes locked on his. "He is a constituent. His name is Silas Croft, and in Texas, we don't streamline our promises to the people who wore the uniform. We keep them." Vance opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked to the chairman for help, but the chairman was still staring at the blank screen, his face ashen. Vance shuffled the papers in front of him, a meaningless gesture of a man searching for a script that no longer existed. "Well, Congresswoman, that video is certainly affecting," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "But it doesn't change the underlying fiscal realities. The program was a promise," Crockett interrupted, her voice gaining a hard edge. "A promise you dismissed as an anecdote. My time has expired," the chairman suddenly barked, banging his gavel sharply, as if waking from a trance. He was red-faced, desperate to wrest back control of his committee. "The gentlewoman's time has expired." Jasmine Crockett held up a hand, not in defiance, but as a simple gesture to pause. She ignored the chairman's sputtering. Her focus was entirely on the man at the witness table. "You will answer to him, Mr. Secretary," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper, yet carrying more force than any shout. "And you will answer to all of them, the thousands of men and women you just labeled as anecdotes." She then calmly leaned back in her chair, picked up her single sheet of paper with Silas Croft's face on it, and placed it in her folder. "I yield back, Mr. Chairman." The hearing was, for all intents and purposes, over. The remaining members went through the motions, but the energy had been sucked from the room. The truth had made an unwelcome appearance, and no amount of procedural governance could put it back in its box. The moment Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the hearing room, she was engulfed. A chaotic scrum of reporters, photographers, and cameramen surged forward, microphones and phones thrust towards her face. The hallway, normally a quiet corridor of power, had become a frantic media choke point. "Congresswoman, what was your goal in there today?" shouted a reporter from a major network. "Are you accusing the president of breaking his promises?" yelled another. She held up her hands, and a fragile pocket of quiet formed around her. She wasn't going to give them a soundbite they could twist. She was going to give them the point. My goal was to give a voice to a constituent who was told his sacrifice was an anecdote, she said, her voice steady and clear. "The men and women who serve this nation are not line items on a spreadsheet. A promise made to a veteran is a sacred duty, and my job is to ensure this body and this administration never forgets that." She gave a firm nod and, with Marcus running interference, pushed through the crowd, leaving a storm of frantic questions in her wake. Before she had even made it back to her office, the clip was already online. It wasn't just the clip. It was the clip. The video was edited by a dozen different news outlets, but the core was always the same. Vance's smug dismissal, anecdotal cases, followed immediately by Crockett's calm retort, "I'd like to introduce you to an anecdotal case." And then the raw, emotional footage of Silas Croft. It was a narrative masterpiece of political combat, made all the more powerful because it was completely real. It went from political Twitter to mainstream Facebook in under an hour. Veterans groups, from the massive American Legion to small, local VFW chapters, shared it with a single, unified message. Finally, someone is listening. The hashtag Anecdote began to trend. Then it exploded. It was used by Democrats, by independents, and, most devastatingly for the administration, by a significant number of lifelong Republicans who believed in the simple, powerful idea that a promise to a soldier should be kept. The White House press secretary was peppered with questions about it during the afternoon briefing, and could only offer a weak defense of Secretary Vance, promising that the administration was reviewing the implementation of the policy. The narrative was lost. Jasmine Crockett had not just won an argument in a committee room, she had reframed the entire national conversation. That evening, the adrenaline that had fueled Jasmine through the day finally ebbed away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its place. She sat in the dark of her small apartment, the city lights of Washington, D.C. twinkling outside her window. Her official phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, buzzed and pinged relentlessly, a constant stream of notifications from news alerts, social media tags, and text messages. Her personal phone, however, had been blessedly silent until now. She saw the screen light up with a picture of her mother and finally answered it. "Hi, Mama," she said, her voice weary. "Jasmine, baby." "I saw it." Her mother's voice came through, warm and tinged with pride. "The whole thing. Your father, he would have been standing up and cheering. You made him so proud today." Jasmine closed her eyes, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. This was the only validation that truly mattered. "Thanks, Mama. It was a day." "But Jasmine," her mother's tone shifted, the pride now edged with a familiar worry that had been a constant companion since Jasmine had entered public life. "You poked the bear, the big one. The people around that man, they don't play fair. The things they say, the things they do. I saw some of the comments online. Are you being careful? Are you listening to your security people?" Jasmine sighed. She had intentionally avoided looking at the comments. She knew what would be there. "I'm fine, Mama. Marcus and the team are handling everything. It's just noise." "It's not just noise, Jasmine, and you know it," her mother insisted. "That kind of hate can curdle into something real. You promise me you're being careful. Don't be walking home alone. Don't be brushing things off. Promise me." "I promise, Mama," Jasmine said, the words feeling heavier than they should. "I love you. I love you too, baby. Now get some rest. You earned it." She hung up the phone, and the silence of the apartment rushed back in, but it was different now. It was filled with her mother's worry. She finally walked over to her work laptop and opened it. Her chief of staff had set up a filtered inbox for the deluge of emails coming in, separating them into categories. The support folder had over 10,000 unread messages. She clicked on it and scrolled through the subject lines. "Thank you from a Navy wife. You spoke for my father. God bless you, Congresswoman." But then, her curiosity got the better of her. Against her better judgment, she clicked on the folder her chief of staff had labeled Urgent Security Threat. The screen filled with a torrent of filth. Racist slurs were interwoven with threats of violence. Her face photoshopped onto grotesque images. Her home address posted with a call for protesters to pay her a visit. The messages accused her of being a traitor, of using a veteran as a political pawn, of disrespecting the president. The hate was visceral, personal, and terrifyingly specific. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This was the private cost of the public victory. For every person she had inspired, she had activated someone who despised her very existence. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding. The victory in the hearing room felt a million miles away. In its place was the cold, isolating reality of the fight she had just picked. A fight that would not end when the cameras were off. The threats and the vitriol were a heavy weight, but the groundswell of support was a rising tide. For 2 days, the political world was consumed by the fallout from the hearing. The White House was in full retreat, issuing statements that Secretary Vance's words were taken out of context, and that President Trump remained the greatest champion the veterans of this country have ever had. But the video didn't lie. The words were clear, and the damage was done. The administration had lost control of the one thing it prized most: the narrative. Still, the Republican Party remained a silent, disciplined wall, unwilling to publicly criticize a cabinet secretary appointed by their own president. That wall, however, was about to develop a very large crack. The crack appeared in the stately, quiet chamber of the United States Senate. It came in the form of Senator Alastair Finch, a third-term Republican from a sprawling, rural state in the Midwest. Finch was a relic of a different era, a man known for his quiet integrity and his deep, abiding respect for the institutions of government. He was a decorated veteran himself, a man who rarely sought the spotlight of cable news, preferring to do his work in committee rooms and through carefully built relationships. 2 days after Crockett's confrontation, Senator Finch rose to speak on the Senate floor. There was no C-SPAN camera crew waiting for him. This was not a planned media event. He began to speak, his voice calm and grave. He didn't mention Jasmine Crockett. He didn't mention Secretary Vance by name. He didn't have to. "Mr. President," he began, addressing the chair, "I rise today to speak about a matter of sacred trust. It is a trust that predates all of us in this chamber. It is the trust between a nation and its defenders." He spoke for 10 minutes about his own service, about the young men he had served with, about the promises they had all implicitly believed in. "This past week," he continued, his voice resonating through the chamber, "I saw a video of a veteran from Texas. He was not a political operative. He was not an actor. He was a man sitting in his garage, holding a letter from his government, a letter that told him a promise made to him was now considered an inefficiency. He felt his country had broken its word to him." Finch paused, looking at his colleagues on both sides of the aisle. A promise made to a soldier is not a line item. It is not subject to fiscal streamlining. It is a moral covenant, sealed with the selfless service of that individual. When we send our young men and women into harm's way, we make a promise that if they are hurt, we will heal them. If they are troubled, we will comfort them. And if they need our help, we will give it. There can be no budget so tight, no policy so efficient, that it absolves us of this fundamental duty. We are better than this. This body is better than this. And this nation must always, always be better than this. He sat down. The speech was a political earthquake. By refusing to attack the other party, and instead framing the issue as a matter of national honor and integrity, Senator Finch had given his Republican colleagues the one thing they needed: permission. Permission to be outraged. Permission to put their loyalty to their veteran constituents above their loyalty to the president's cabinet. Within hours, 3 other Republican senators had released statements echoing Finch's sentiment. The wall had crumbled. The issue was no longer partisan. It was patriotic. 1 week later, Jasmine Crockett stood at a podium, not in a chaotic hallway, but in a reserved press room in the Capitol. The firestorm had forced the White House to announce a full reevaluation of the Rural Veterans Care Access Program. It was a clear victory, but Jasmine knew a reevaluation could be reversed the moment the political spotlight moved on. She was there to make it permanent. She was not alone. Standing with her was a bipartisan group of representatives from the House Veterans Affairs Committee, including 2 Republicans who had sat silently during her confrontation with Secretary Vance a week prior. Senator Finch's speech had given them the courage to act. Crockett stepped to the microphone, her demeanor calm and resolute. She did not gloat. She did not spike the football. She simply laid out the path forward. "Today we are introducing a simple 2-page piece of legislation," she announced. "It is called the Promise to Veterans Act. This bill does 2 things. First, it fully restores and funds the Rural Veterans Care Access Program. Second, it protects that funding from being altered or terminated by executive action. ensuring that any changes must be debated and passed by Congress, the People's House. She looked out at the assembled press, her gaze sweeping across the room. This was never about one program. It was about one principle. When a man or woman serves our country serves them back. Period. That promise is not negotiable, it is not a suggestion, and it is not an anecdote. It is the bedrock of our commitment to those who have given everything. We expect a vote on this bill within the month, and we expect it to pass. 3 weeks later, the news cycle had long since moved on. The Promise to Veterans Act had passed the House with an overwhelming bipartisan majority and was expected to do the same in the Senate. Secretary Preston Vance had quietly resigned, citing a desire to spend more time with his family. For the talking heads on TV, the story was over. But in a small diner off a dusty highway in East Texas, the story's echo was just beginning to be felt. Silas Croft sat in a booth by the window, stirring his coffee. The brief, bewildering glare of national attention had faded, leaving him with a strange mix of relief and purpose. He was no longer just a mechanic with a bad back. He was the man who had spoken up. A young woman in her early 20s, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, hesitated by his table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "Are you Mr. Croft?" Silas looked up. "I am," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "I'm Brianna. I just got out of the Marines a few months ago," she said, shifting her weight nervously. "I saw you on the news, the video, and then the thing with the congresswoman." Silas nodded for her to continue. I wanted to say thank you," Brianna said, her eyes welling up slightly. "I've been having a hell of a time with the VA. Getting my records, filing my claims, it felt like screaming into a black hole. I was ready to just give up on all of it. I figured nobody cared." She took a breath, finding her resolve. "But then I saw you. You were so real. And you were so angry and hurt, just like I've been. And then I saw her," she said, her voice full of awe. "That congresswoman from Dallas, she fought for you. Like you were the only person in the world that mattered. It made me think, maybe it's not hopeless." "It made me decide to try one more time." She gestured vaguely with her thumb over her shoulder. "I'm on my way to the county services office right now to file my appeal. I probably would have just stayed home if I hadn't seen you." Silas looked at the young Marine, at the mixture of fear and fight in her eyes. He saw his own helplessness from that day in the garage. But he also saw it reflected back at him as a spark of someone else's hope. His moment of desperation, broadcast to the world, had not just led to a political victory in a faraway city. It had reached across the state and given this young woman the strength to keep fighting her own silent battle. He, the man who felt voiceless, had become a voice for others. He felt the weight of his own burden lighten, replaced by something new. A shared strength. He pushed his coffee cup aside and gave her a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Good," he said. "You go get what you earned. Don't you dare give up." What does it truly mean for a government to keep its promise? Is it about budgets and policies? Or is it about the individual lives that are changed by those decisions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that go beyond the headlines, don't forget to subscribe.